Hello everybody, we're back here on Lone Oak Farms for Farm Sim 17, and it's near nighttime, and we've been in the process of windrowing our grass seed fields. So I'll toggle out to the windrower. As you can see, it's a little bit dark. Oops, that isn't what I intended to do. Crank her up and get her going. Lone Oak tree stands tall over there. It's getting harder to see as day fades to night. I think I still have the course set up. Just need to pull it. Field 44. Should be on field setting. Actually, you know what? Let me check to make sure. Okay, good. Grass seed windrow is on, so we'll get this going. Know that there is too much left. Oh, we're starting the back and forth courses at the moment. Yeah, there's still going to be a while to go. I'll maybe quit this or finish this off cam if we don't get through it kind of in the allotted time here. I don't get bored with this kind of thing, but I realize others may just by watching the same thing over and over. I'm not even sure how many episodes of Lone Oak I've done so far. We're finally getting to grass seed harvest, so I'm kind of looking forward to the next step. Let me check the weather here real quick. Okay, I think, yeah, we're going to be day 2 tomorrow. Basically, I mean, we can, even though in real life you don't harvest, for maybe a week and a half or something after you cut it, because you give the wind time to dry out. In game here, we can combine the very following day, and I think I'm going to do that because I see there's rain in the forecast. So I'd like to get it all done and baled up behind the combine, so I don't lose any revenue. So we're going to do that. I may have mentioned the last time we had an episode that I was recently up to the farm. I was there again this past weekend, not literally the farm itself, but some of their ground, and had more time of just walking around in the fields and remembering times I've spent there. Took a ton more pictures, having trouble getting them kind of off my cell phone, but maybe I'll share some of those here at some point. And by the way, in real life, and I know that there's varying opinions on this, in real life on Lone Oak Farms, what they've tended to do is they cut round and around the fields versus back and forth. I can't remember if I've talked about this in here before. I'm not sure why. I mean, I've talked to a number of farmers about this over the years, and all of them seem convinced that the way they do it is right, and the only way that it should be done, whether round and round or back and forth, for whatever reason, up in Lone Oak, they chose to go round and round. I don't know if it makes it any easier to have several machines going, if it's going round and round, for them to stay out of each other's way. Because I think I've expressed before, up until recently, the way you windrowed it, you also had to combine it going the same direction. So back and forth, you had to be sure that you were picking up the windrow the correct way. And ditto with round and round. I think it was just maybe easier to see when you're going round and round that there's only one way to do it. And we typically did it clockwise on the farm. That's kind of how they set up the windrows. But, it's interesting. I worked for one other farmer, and he did his farm back and forth primarily. But for his outer rounds, he always did 4 or 5 circuits of the field, before he would start going back and forth. But it's interesting, he did his counterclockwise, and I thought he had a pretty good reason for doing so. When the combines come in and they go, I think everybody knows a combine's unloading auger is generally on the left side of the machine. So if you go clockwise, your unloading auger is exposed to whatever there may be sitting at the edge of the field. Versus if you go counterclockwise, your unloading auger is more protected because it's on the inside. And there can be a lot of obstacles, trees and whatnot, kind of around the edge of the field. And I know in the old days with the combines that we had, some of them were so old they were of the style that uh, you didn't just let the unloading auger out and then take it back in when you were done emptying the tank. Some of those you let it out and then you kept it out by ratcheting it kind of in place. So oftentimes, when you'd be in a field and you would start a new section of the field, if you had one of those combines, the unloading auger is sticking kind of out, it's very exposed, and so all you got to do is nick a tree or nick some obstacle very slightly, and you've damaged your unloading auger. So I think the reasoning of this other farmer was, do it counterclockwise, and that way you don't damage your equipment. I can't remember if I've ever talked to my uncles about that. It seems a decent idea, but probably anymore it doesn't even matter as much. The hydraulics have improved, and the combines nowadays, you can easily take the unloading auger in, take it out when you need, and it isn't that big of a deal. Back when I was on the farm, for some of the machines that we had, it was a factor. I also wanted to mention, at the time of this recording, it's July. I think we changed another day. This is early morning, July 3rd, and typically, they in the past, I think traditionally they would like to start combining. I think by the 4th of July, kind of in this area. That's kind of a rule of thumb. We've had a rainy, cloudy spring this year being 2022, and it's kind of slowed up the harvest. And I was thinking, I kind of paused on recording Lone Oak videos because I was figuring, well, I'm in the middle of doing some windrowing here in game, so wouldn't it be kind of fun if I went out to the farm and maybe took some live footage or attempt to do so? Although I gotta say, of anything on the farm that's kind of hard to get footage of, it would be windrowing because it tends to be kind of a night. The pictures that I do have of it from, taken years ago, they were taken kind of late evening, if you will, and that's about the only time you can do it. Maybe early morning you could come out, but at least for the varieties of grass that we had on the farm, that tended to be the only times you could get pictures. And so I don't know what I'd be able to do if I, went out to the farm, I could at least take some pictures of the equipment. I know some people have left comments wanting to know what kind of equipment they have now, and maybe to take a few pictures of those. I took some in a shed when they were sitting in the shed here recently, but I don't know if anybody's ever tried to do that before. You try to take pictures of equipment sitting in a shed, it's extremely difficult, when there's just barely enough room for the machine itself sitting in there, and then you try to squeeze it in. It just doesn't work very well when you try to, take a picture of things inside there. You don't get the full scope of the machine or what have you. So it'd be kind of nice to see them when they're out and about ready to be used. So I recently contacted my uncle. I asked him kind of when he thought windrowing would begin, and he thought it was still a week or two out yet. So at some point, and it isn't going to land perfectly in game here, when we're windrowing, our own harvesting here right now. But I'll try to share that at some point. For the moment, I was just thinking of some additional memories from, years on the farm, and windrowing in particular. Um, I think I've showed pictures of some of the older machines that we had, those John Deere 800 series. Not a machine like this. I don't know if they've ever had a New Holland. They're quite like this, but this is similar in style to what they have now. But I remember one year. I mean, these things were notorious for overheating. And one year, we took it out to the field. Actually, they had two of them, and it happened right. Oh, let me see if I can find on the map. I can just point it out. Hopefully he'll keep going while we're here. Yeah, he's keep going. The road comes by here, and then it takes this little jog, and then comes further south. Well, there's a cemetery on the hill, kind of right back in here, and it just so happened is my cousin and I were driving these machines out to the field, which I think we're down over here on the map. It doesn't we don't have it on the Lone Oak map. But right about by the cemetery where my dear grandmother is buried, his machine broke down. The engine block, something in there. Well, it wasn't the engine block. It was, I think it was some grease and old straw sitting near the engine block. It caught fire. It kind of really freaked us out because you hear you smoking, um, as we kind of came through there, so we had to stop, and it was just nasty. I think we didn't. These were old machines. We didn't have anything on us to prevent a fire. Things like some type of extinguisher, what have you. So I think what we did is we went under the engine where there wasn't smoke, and I think we found where the grease was. It was burning, and we scraped it off the frame. So crisis averted. Those machines, as they were getting old, just had more and more problems, and eventually, of course, they were retired. For all I know, they had them out just so they could give their nephew something to do in the summer. But I guess it did, teach me a little about mechanics, if you will. And I don't consider myself a very mechanically inclined person, if you will. Shoot, I'm an accountant. I got a desk job. That tends to be more where my expertise is, if you will. Now it's interesting. I got a son coming who's the opposite. He's outdoors way more often than I am. He's very mechanically inclined and gifted. He's taken apart engines and what have you and put them back together. Things that that I haven't done, and I don't feel I have any skills at. But you do get some, and when you're out on the farm, particularly late at night, you can't just go crying to the uncles every time something goes wrong. You need to learn to fix some of these things on your own. Yeah, I got the vehicle switcher. I'm curious how to. I know he used it at one point on 17. I'll have to see if I can figure that out again. If I got Group 1, I put swathers in Group 1. Do I hold it down? Oh, I'll maybe figure that out sometime off cam. So we couldn't even burn one up. I think still that same night we pulled out into the field with it and kept going. But they obviously were getting long in the tooth. I remember one season with one of those old 800s cracking something on the frame. It was on the header, and to where I couldn't raise and lower the header. I think it was something on a bracket that broke, and I remember we went to a neighbor. He helped weld it up and said, well, it'll probably last for this season, and then afterwards, you need to do some more longer term maintenance. Yeah, well, that never came. I know up until the time they finished using it, I think it was just on the neighbor's welds, so it never was done. But it was fun to learn a little bit about mechanical things on there. Because occasionally, by and large, probably the most common thing that would bust would be a sickle section. and these had there was a difference between the 2280 John Deeres that they had versus these old 800s. I think I may have mentioned it before. The 2280s had open guards. I think they were called stubby guards, to where the cutting knife, if you will, was just wide open so the grass could come right into it. And on these old 800s, they had a fully enclosed guard to where the sickle knife, as it slid in between all the guards, it was always fully encased. There it wasn't totally open to the grass. And I kind of think that tended to protect the sickles better in the 800s, the John Deere 800s, versus the 2280s, which had the stubby guards from rocks and that kind of thing. But boy, it still seemed like we had to swap out a number of sickles. I think we would usually, once a day, if you will, during maintenance, we would pull the sickle all the way out. And these weren't very large machines. I mean, even the 2280s, their headers were a whopping 12 feet in width. I think the machines they have now are quite a bit wider. So it wasn't too bad pulling it all out, although sometimes it can be a chore. It always gets stuck on some guard, and when you're having others help you to get it out, you always got to be careful you don't take someone's finger off, while you're in there messing around with it. Unfortunately, that never happened. But like I say, usually it was out, I think probably once a day, to sharpen the blades, look the sickle over, make sure there weren't any loose sections. And those old ones, I mean, I think I mentioned this before, it was on the rivets, riveting system, if you will, to where you used, we put a hunk of steel under there with a rivet, and then go up between the cutting bar, if you will, and the sickle blade to hold it on, and you would beat the end with a hammer to kind of mushroom it over so that it held your sickle section. So in the field, the sections would periodically break, and only rarely would you pull the whole sickle out. It obviously was easier to work on if you pulled it all the way out, but we usually tried to fix it on the windrower itself. So sometimes we'd have to loosen or take off some of the guards to do it. It was kind of a pain, but fun to do. And, walking in the fields here just a weekend ago, I went to a field, and it isn't on the Lone Oak map, so it isn't one I can point to. It's to the west a ways with one of their landlords. They lease some property from. There's a field that they had that had an island kind of in the middle of it, a grove of oaks and maples and whatnot. And I still remember, I had a memory flash, from years ago, and I still remember how many windrows in at kind of the crest of the hill, just to the north of this particular field island. There's a massive boulder in the ground, and it's 3 windrows in. I'm sure I could have walked right to it. I kind of saw it off in the distance. I didn't go over by that area, but had the memory. One year, the first year I was in that particular field, I think one of my uncles was riding with me as we were kind of opening the field up, and he knew about where that rock was, but do you think he told me that it was there? Well, he didn't. So, when we got to it, I didn't see it and ran into it, and there was sparks flying everywhere, and he was laughing at me. He actually turned the machine off because I was so scared, I think. Didn't know what was going on. So he pulled the lever back to turn the thing off. And then we set about fixing it, so maybe he figured that was as good a time as any to teach me how to change a sickle section in the field. But yeah, some of those memories like that came back, deja vu. So at the time, I at least had the presence of mind to count the number of windrows in. I just basically told myself, you're going to remember that this is 3 windrows in at the top of the hill. So I know the following year, when I did that same field again, By the time I got to the third windrow in, I was very much on alert. I tilted the header back as much as I could, and this time I just bounced over the rock instead of having to get off and repair a bunch of sickle teeth. And there were other things that had to be fixed on these machines too, especially those old 800. They were, I think I've mentioned before, they were draper machines, elevated drapers, if you will. So right off the sickle, there was no auger, there was just a belt, and the belt would haul it to the center where it made the windrow. And occasionally, the belt was kind of moved and it was held on these big rollers, on either end. I guess there was two belts on each header, one on the right, one on the left, carrying it to the center. And it had these little wooden slats on it, I guess, to help carry some of the material to the center. And it just seemed problematic periodically, every now and again. And I don't know how this would happen. There'd be a big old rip or tear in it, and a hole would show up in the canvas. And a lot of times you could keep going. It wouldn't necessarily mean that it would stop moving the belt, but it did tell you there was a problem you needed to get repaired at some point. And sometimes it was just flat out difficult to deal with. Those were hard repairs to do in the field, and if you didn't have the tools, which most of the time we didn't for that kind of thing, or material to patch it with, pretty well shut you down for the night. Whereas, sickle sections, we could repair those all day long. Yeah, and the sickles, by the way, thinking of those 2280 John Deeres, it was a 12-foot sickle, but it was busted into two parts, and so there was two sickles that you always had to deal with. They had what was called a wobble box on either side of the header, and it was pretty cool how it worked. It had this little arm that came out, and it wobbled back and forth, to run the sickle. And I always marvel at the engineering it takes to make those things. And I don't know how they engineered it where the two sickles overlapped in the middle. There kind of was a couple special sickle sections that they had for where the two were together. So I don't know how they engineered that. I think they overlapped enough that they never were totally apart, to where there was a gap between them. I could see major problems if it had a gap between them, so they would overlap in the middle. But when we pulled them out, the advantage with those is they were so easy just to fit in the back of the pickup, and haul around or what have you, and versus the other ones where the sickle was all one. And they tended to be a whole lot easier to pull out and do maintenance on too, because they were smaller. So it's just, I don't know. Maybe some guys have it down as to just how quickly or how easily they can pull out a sickle, but it always tended to be an ordeal. I know when we did it, ideally the tolerances are tight enough that you can cut grass, and they do have to be pretty tight in order to cut grass, as opposed to, say, some of the cereal grains or what have you that are larger stemmed and more easy to cut, when they're dry and whatnot. Well, a lot of this was still wet, in particular wet grass, and very small stemmed, and so you had to have it really tight, which meant, whenever you tried to pull the sickle out, sometimes you wanted to just go get the tractor and hitch it up and pull it out that way, but of course we couldn't do that. Another thing that comes to mind that was always an issue with, especially with those older machines, as they got long in the tooth, but I don't care how new it is, when something gums up in the machine to where it keeps cutting, but the material doesn't move, you've got a problem. And so whether it was a 2280 or the John Deere 800s, we would have times when the whole header would plug. And, well, When it plugs, you have to unplug it, and a lot of times it wasn't even too difficult to unplug. I mean, sometimes the 2280 headers could be a bear to unplug if you didn't catch it in time, because it would have an auger in the middle where, it would wind the grass around it pretty tight. I mean, you felt like you were dealing with a bale of hay up there, sometimes. But on those older machines, they were wide open, they had just the draper belts. A lot of times, even though it got plugged, all you had to do was lift the header and back up, and you kept the machinery on, and the belts would keep turning, and your sickle would keep going, and eventually it would all drop through, as you backed up onto the ground. But what it tended to do was leave what we called a wad, and just basically a wad of grass, and which wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, but the trouble is the thicker the band of grass, that would be left on the ground, the harder it was for it to dry out, and a lot of times it didn't. It would go all the way to harvest, and it still could be a little wet inside, and so when the combines would come through, well, let's just put it this way. When I was combining, what I tended to do was stop the machine, I would keep everything running, and I would get out of the cab and I would go feed it in by hand. Because what I didn't want to do was plug the combine, because I was inept at handling the machine and gently feeding in this wad of grass. And I know there's some guys that are able to do that. And I guess it takes a little more experience than what I had. But because there's ways in cab you can slow down your header, slow down the speed of the belt that's bringing in this windrow to just a crawl. So there's some things you can do, but what invariably happens is a lot of this grass, it's all stuck together. So you sit there carefully trying to feed the wad in, and all of a sudden it grabs the whole wad and shoot, tries to bring it all into the combine at once. And pretty soon you've just plugged your combine. And so I tended just to try to avoid that. I would just get out of the combine, leave it running like I say, and then I would go out and throw it in by hand, and so I could control how much was going into the machine. And so you get dusty and dirty doing that, but I figured I'd be safer. It was easier to explain why I got out of the combine what I was doing than it would be to explain how I just plugged the combine and took it down for a little while until I had time to uncork it. But a lot of times too, it depended on the cutting conditions of the field. If you produced a wad while cutting, a lot of times it was because you lost a sickle tooth. That could be your first clue, because it didn't always throw a lot of sparks. Sometimes they would fall cleanly out of there for whatever reason, and you didn't even notice. Well, now you have a whole section of your sickle gone, and it isn't cutting in an area, so it's going to bog your machine down as the auger will grab the grass and it isn't cut off, and so things will start to wrap and it'll make a mess. So sometimes that's what would cause your header to get clogged up, to where there'd be a wad. But other times it would be the grass is lying a particular way and it's tight to the ground. Maybe the wind had picked it up and did something to the grass to lay it totally flat. Who knows what it would be. Occasionally there'd be these fields where there would just be a ton of wads in there. I mean, I remember, I think I've described before, these 800s, they had these hand levers on them that you use for steering, to make square corners, kind of like bumper cars, if you will. And I remember one night I was literally sore because I had to pull back so many times more than normal because of tough cutting conditions and wads. And so a lot of times when that would happen, and this is absolutely what you didn't want to do because you were tired, you'd go all night long on these things, getting the job done, and then in the morning, the boss would say, all right, we're going to go out to the field with a pitchfork, and we're going to try to take care of all these wads to spread them out so they dry, so they don't cause a problem for the combines, when they come through. And it wasn't the funnest thing to do, but was very helpful then when harvest, would happen. That's just one of the things you had to do, occasionally. If there's just a wad here or there, and you kind of just let it go. But when there was a plethora of them, yeah, sometimes some additional work would be done. So that's kind of. I'm just looking at the clock here and seeing I'm coming up on half an hour. Maybe I'm already over it even. And so it's time to terminate the episode. I'll put that on autosave. And I've almost got this particular field done, I think. And look at my passes. Yep, I got just a handful of passes left. So maybe what I'll do is terminate the episode here and maybe finish it off cam. I don't know. I never know what to do with that. I think everybody here knows. It's no secret. I'm not a YouTuber. If I knew what I was doing, I could maybe stop talking here. Do some fancy thing like set it to music, and you'd watch while this guy goes super duper fast, and he just finishes the field up. And everybody says, what an artistic presentation, but unfortunately for all of you, that's not me. I still don't know how to do that, so I just got to do it the hard way and let it all out. But that doesn't mean I have to force all of you to watch it. So thanks for checking in, at least on this episode. The next time we come in game, I think we'll be ready to harvest. So hope everybody's doing well. Have yourself a wonderful evening, and God bless you.